summarize the events that led up to your injury?
Okay. It was the homecoming game for my senior year, and I went like helmet to helmet with another kid on the other team, and I didn't really feel the effects of that hit until the following day when we were running sprints, and it felt like my brain was just like bouncing in my head, and I just had the worst headache that I ever had in my life, and I didn't say anything to any coaches or trainers or my parents or anything, but those headaches continued throughout the whole rest of the week, and then the following game that next Friday, I still had the headaches, but I just took 3 Advil and kind of hoped for the best. And I knew that something was wrong because I'd never had a headache like that ever, and it was like excruciating. Just never went away or got any better the whole rest of the week. Mm-hmm. So I kept playing, and then about end of the first quarter, I had like blurry vision, but I talked myself out of it. I was like, it's probably sweat. I'm like, I think I'll be all right. So I kept playing, and then there was one hit like right before the second half, and I got hit right underneath my chin, and then I slammed my head on the ground, and I thought it was a late hit, so I popped up really quick to like talk to the ref and be like, "Are you gonna call that?" Like that kind of thing. And as soon as I stood up, I just couldn't feel my legs. It was like from the waist down, it was just rubber. So I kind of got a little scared after that, and that's when I knew that something was obviously very, very wrong. So I went back to the huddle with my friends, and I told them, like, I definitely have a concussion or something. I definitely have a concussion. I just kept like repeating it, and then a couple of my friends helped me walk to the sideline, and I sat down. My trainer was looking at me, and that's like the last thing I remember because I had a seizure, and I had to be airlifted to the hospital, and I had like CAT scans showed that I had like swelling on my brain and something called a subdermal hematoma, which is basically just a brain bleed. So I had to have emergency surgery to relieve the pressure on my brain, and that's...
Why do you think that you refrained from reporting your initial injury?
I was afraid to report my initial injury because it was just a headache. That was the only symptom that I had. So I didn't want to go to my coach and say, "Oh, coach, I have a headache." You always get headaches. It's football, And I was senior captain, so I wanted to set an example for the younger kids. And I had always heard these, stories of, players who had played before me that played with broken collarbones and played with all these injuries. So I wanted to be that guy that, people talked about, and I wanted to, be someone that people looked up to.
Consequences of your injury, long and short term?
Well, short term, I just had a surgery that kept me out of school for probably 2 weeks, and then I later had an infection from that first surgery, so I had to have another surgery that kept me out probably another week, and then I actually had an allergic reaction to medicine I had, so that kept me out for another week after that too. So my senior year, I was kind of like in and out of the hospital, but luckily long term, I've been completely fine. And what I had was something called second impact syndrome, and the statistics on people who have that injury, it's actually 50% of the people who have that don't live, and then people who do live, the majority of those people are like severely mentally handicapped for the rest of their life. So I'm very fortunate that I do not have any long-term issues from that injury.
Good. What type of personal changes have you had to make after your injury?
Well, it was my dream to play college football, and I worked towards reaching that goal my entire life. And I was going to play football at like a Division I AA school, and I had schools recruit me for that. And then after that injury, I couldn't play contact sports anymore. So it actually kind of like completely changed the direction of my life because I would have been at a much smaller school than Rutgers. But in the end, I feel like it worked out because I'm getting a good education, and the other schools I wanted to go to didn't have like the sports management that I'm doing now. So life kind of works its way out. So.
Future, what are some ways you believe injuries like yours can be prevented?
I think the number one way that injuries like this could be prevented is just merely through education and educating athletes on, the long-term effects and the short-term effects and the symptoms, of concussions or other injuries. Because the thing with me is that I only had a headache, and I was under the impression that if you had a concussion, you either were knocked out or you were vomiting or nauseous or all these other stereotypical symptoms of concussions, and that's why I always talked myself out of it. I didn't really second guess it. Like, no, I don't have a concussion. Like, I'm fine because I'm not vomiting and I didn't get knocked out, so it must be good. So if kids are informed of the long-term effects and the short-term effects of what can happen to them if they do have an injury like this or another serious injury, then they might make a different choice and keep themselves out a week rather than playing and not being able to play for the rest of their life.